He had lost his shop, customers never came, and so nor did their coin. He would be the laughing stock of his family, salt of the earth farmers who told him that it could never work, and that he should know his place. Damn them, he thought, their poisonous words like weeds in his garden that had grown brown and fruitless. Ale-drenched and sodden, he stumbled his way to a barn for shelter and wallowed in hay. For an hour he sat, and in his mind he constructed arguments with his family over and over, trying to figure out a way in which he would be known as the cheated rather than the truth of the matter, which was that he was a merchant that could not convince a skeever to nibble on cheese. But suddenly claws crept over the stable wall. Drunken indifference, disbelief, then horror. The impish fellow gave him a letter of credit, said that he could have the riches and mercantile magnificence that he desired. He just had to make a deal with his master. Beware, Clavicus Vile, the master of insidious wishes, and Daedric prince of trickery and bargains, for he will appeal to the downtrodden, the lost, the lustful and greedy, and he will make them an offer they will not refuse. He is the deal with the devil personified, a master of the fine print and interpretive wording, and do not be deceived by his unassuming appearance, a young horned fellow with his canine companion, the quintessential boy and his dog. For he will relieve you of your fears of the future and present you a path to your desires, whether that be riches and glory, or rather something like the admiration of others. All these things he will provide you with, for a cost. If you're lucky, it will be a simple and straightforward trade. You give him what he wants, and he gives you what you asked for. This by far is the best case, and an arguably rare scenario. Take for example the unfortunate case of Sebastian Lort. Lort was a powerful conjurer, and his mastery of the summoning arts likely had an influence on his very own daughter. You see, she became a devout worshipper of Hircine, the lord of the hunt, and her favoured prince cursed her with lycanthropy. Sebastian could not bear the condition of his daughter, and so prayed to Clavicus Vile for his aid, and it was given. Clavicus bestowed upon him the cure he thought most fitting, and that cure was the Rueful Axe, a double-bladed weapon designed for the killing of werewolves. Sebastian Lort clearly did not feel great about the deal, but as a master conjurer, perhaps he should have known better. Perhaps he should have asked for a cure for the condition of lycanthropy that does not involve any of the following: death, mutilation, sickness, or madness. But then again, who knows with Clavicus? He makes these deals and interacts with mortals not because he is charitable, or even because he likes to test the capacity of mortals. There seems not to be some grander purpose or philosophical principle to his meddling. The real answer may surprise you. He does so because he is bored. Funnily enough, he may be better suited to the title Daedric Prince of Boredom, for that seems to be his natural state. It is in the interactions with mortals, the high-stakes gambles, and tricking and deceiving that all provide the momentary thrills that stave off the eternity of boredom from which this prince suffers. Now, we have been lucky in the previous deep dives in that the Daedric princes Bal and Mora both had stories with which we could explain some kind of mythological origin. However, with our friend Clavicus Vile here, that is not the case, but using the premise of a prince beset by boredom, we can sort of reverse engineer a theoretical beginning. In the Second Era, Pelagius Habor, a daedrologist of the Imperial City, wrote a scholarly essay on the relationship between Clavicus Vile and Barbas, or in a way, a relationship with himself. You see, it is well known that Clavicus Vile and Barbas are inextricable, and that while in scholarly circles there is debate about whether or not Barbas is a mere greater Daedric servant who, I quote, is no more linked to Vile than a horse is linked to its rider, we know for a fact through the events of the games themselves that Clavicus Vile's power is not whole without Barbas. So Barbas is, as Pelagius Habor suggests, part of Clavicus Vile. He mentions that nowhere in Tamriel are there depictions of Clavicus Vile without his loyal hound Barbas, and that even crude, hand-carved idols and cave paintings of these Daedra, presumably made by early Nedic tribes, have been dated to the Merethic era. By the way, hold that in the back of your mind, because I do want to address some speculative importance of Clavicus to the early Nedic peoples, but that aside, continuing with this thesis, Pelagius Habor says this: if we accept the premise that Clavicus Vile and Barbas are, at least in some sense, the same person, the natural question is why? Why would an entity possessing godlike power allow itself to be bifurcated? I have a number of hypotheses, but my best guess is simply this: companionship. The life of a prince is one of near total isolation. Some princes, like Hermaeus Mora and Nocturnal, appear to revel in this solitude, but everything we know of Clavicus Vile indicates that he is a profoundly social being. His love of bartering, his willingness to bestow wishes upon those that engage with him, his bewitching mask, each of these things point to a being that thrives on interaction, conversation, and play. A being so inclined would likely go mad without some companion to speak to, argue with, and complain about. One might even view it as a marriage of sorts, albeit an inverted one. Rather than two becoming one, as in the Pledge of Mara, one has become two, a paradoxical reversal of the Adric ritual. So while we can't really suggest a specific origin for Clavicus Vile, we can assume that at one point, Vile and Barbas were one being, sometime in the dawn, or perhaps a Kalpa before. Who knows, but a really long time ago, before the first cultures of Tamriel would begin interacting with him. Clavicus, out of need for sociability and companionship, split his very own power to become two distinct beings, the greater and the lesser, the master and the servant, the boy and his dog. Pelagius elaborates more on why Barbas should specifically appear as a dog. But why a dog, you ask? I've puzzled over this for years. Again, I can offer little more than supposition. My best guess is that it has to do with power roles. If Clavicus Vile sheared off a larger share of his animus to create an equal, the two would plot and scheme against each other constantly. In creating a canine counterpart, Vile ensures his position as master. Dogs are ancient symbols of loyalty and submission. They are servants and never masters, so it is with Barbas. Of course, Barbas is not always a dog. Like other Daedric princes, Barbas can present himself in a number of different forms. He has appeared as both man and mer, as animals, lesser Daedra, even inanimate objects. This ability to bend his shape but retain his fundamental animus is a power that no other Daedra on record has been able to replicate, aside from princes, that is. Coincidence? I think not. Pelagius makes very specific mention of dogs being ancient symbols of loyalty and submission, as for justification as to perhaps why Clavicus made himself a canine counterpart, and I can't help myself but go on a little tangent here. I wonder how much Clavicus Vile was foundational in the early tribes of man in Tamriel's history. In the description, I will link a theory video of mine that provides evidence for a view of Tamriel that includes inhabitation by Nedic tribes of man far before the elves would suggest, and even perhaps predating them. But the short of it was that man, which could be broadly grouped into the category of needs, has been on Tamriel for a long time. We are talking Stone Age hunter-gatherers that, if I am to be believed, were originally primarily Daedra worshippers. Now, this is based on the origin of the Totems of Hircine, as well as Reachman culture functioning as a sort of geographical isolate of early Nedic culture, but we also have examples such as Pelagius provided, hand-carved idols and ancient cave paintings dating back to the Merethic era that depict Clavicus Vile. Now, do be aware that we are all within the realm of speculation, but what if the dogs as ancient symbols of loyalty and submission, disregarding our real-world history and associations, came from Clavicus Vile and Barbas rather than he choosing such an arrangement based on previously known symbols? You could even go further and suggest that Clavicus Vile was first finding his stride with the Nedic tribes of man, and that he would find many worshippers who would be willing to be bestowed wishes for service or trade. Clavicus Vile gets entertainment, a Days of Our Lives but with the early human tribes, and they get whatever they desired at the time. I like to imagine that the very domestication of the dog might have been modelled off Clavicus Vile's and Barbas' relationship, having it shown as a possibility. Perhaps Nedic tribes copied, or maybe even Clavicus bestowed upon them the ability to domesticate ancient canines. Consider also that he had interactions with another Nedic group called the Kothringi. Archaeology has found medallions of their make depicting him, and at the height of the Nahartan flu, when the Kothringi were facing extinction, they entered a pact with Clavicus Vile so they may be saved. But unfortunately, his solution was to make them undead, a classic Clavicus deal. There is lots of fun and wild speculation to be had with this Daedric prince's involvement with the early Nedic peoples, but I think we should move on now to the more concrete stuff. So now that we've established the dynamic between Clavicus Vile and Barbas, let's more thoroughly explore their relationship. Clavicus Vile in almost every dealing is the far more whimsical, disregarding, and aloof element. He says what he wants, and if he doesn't get it, he tends to suggest rash and disproportional punishments. In an out-of-canon source by Michael Kirkbride, he is described as the child god of the Morningstar, and in the majority of his physical manifestations, he appears child-sized or at the very least youthful. But most of all, in personality, he can seem like quite the petulant youngling, possessing selfishness, playfulness, a seeking of constant entertainment, and of course the relationship with his companion presenting the typical boy and dog dynamic. Clavicus is even at times quite rude and disavowing of Barbas, claiming him to be stupid, annoying, and frustrating, but in reality, no matter what he says, he would be lost without him. It is unclear what Clavicus was exactly before the split, whether he was exactly as he is now, or rather Barbas is an entire facet of the original being Psyche, but split, perhaps his more rational and responsible part. Barbas is often the voice of reason when Clavicus suggests some wild consequence or desire, and he has even worked behind the scenes many times to work out a situation that ultimately is in Clavicus's best interest despite his whims at the time. If he is in fact only a part of the whole being Psyche pre-split, then perhaps it was intentionally compartmentalized into two separate beings. Consider that if the main goal was to avert boredom, then would it not be best to have each portion have different personalities, even opposing personalities, in order to provide contrasting views and discussions so they may bicker and disagree and enjoy each other's differences at times? Otherwise, I suppose if Barbas really was just to be a loyal servant only, a mindless automaton of sorts, then he may as well not have been split at all. You could argue that with Clavicus Vile disposing of all his responsibility and seriousness into the part that is Barbas, the loyal and responsible companion, he is able to free himself of such inhibitions and instead pursue whatever fun he chooses without having to internalize any worries or responsibilities. However, Barbas ultimately is a servant to his master, and a Daedra at that. Do not misconstrue me saying that his responsibility and greater sense of fairness is equivalent to him being some guiding light of morality. He can be just as devious. Let us consider one of the greater plots that this duo has been involved in. In the Second Era, Clavicus Vile entered a secret union known as the Triad. This alliance was made with the Daedric princes Mephala and Nocturnal. Their goal was to make a power play for the control of all Nirn, yet Nocturnal had other interests in mind and would betray the princes of secrets and of bargains when the time was right. Clavicus made deals with the Slode of Ulvor Kus, prompting them to help him acquire the Heart of Transparent Law, the Stone of the Crystal Tower, and key to their schemes. This seemingly failed, but the Triad persisted, and Barbas, seeking to please his master, enacted his own plan to infiltrate Vvardenfell and use a powerful staff called the Sun-Ra to siphon energy from Vivec in order to divine the location of the Clockwork City, where he then lowered its defenses and allowed havoc to be unleashed, but the vestige thwarted Barbas before his master could enter. Nocturnal would play various tricks and schemes throughout this Triad alliance, and we can explore them more in her dedicated episode, but ultimately, when Nocturnal's betrayal of Mephala and Clavicus was realized, they would begrudgingly help the Psijic Order and the Vestige to stop Nocturnal in her quest to become omnipresent and all-powerful. Afterwards, they joined the Cold Harbor Compact. Now, I suppose his true intentions are hard to exactly discern, but somehow, I don't think that Vile's motivation was entirely about gained power, but rather the excitement and trickery that a secret alliance such as the Triad may bring, and we can certainly see he got what he bargained for, if that was all his desire. Being a part of a thrilling heist to steal the power of worlds, and then also having to play turncoat and help heroes defeat your betrayer. Sounds like one of the more exhilarating adventures you could have within your history. But from what we know so far, it would seem that this period in the Second Era was the only time Clavicus made a move so grand and challenged the state of affairs in Mundus. But with that said, let's see if we can ascertain more of his personality quirks from his interactions with mortals. And one such quirk that stands out to me is his, one could say, Daedric tendencies. You see, in the Aedra-Daedra dichotomy of the elven faiths, the Daedra were those at Arda that chose to withhold their powers from creation, whereas the Aedra willingly gave pieces of themselves and invested in the creation of Mundus. Now, I'm not about to suggest that Clavicus Vile is an Aedra, however, he does seem willing to split his power, which in essence is to give part of himself to create something new. The paramount example here is what he did with Barbas. He gave part of his own power a sentience and independence separate from his own, creating from his very own energy, not unlike what the Aedra did. And also, like the Aedra, he seems far more invested in mortals. Now, arguably, the motivations are quite different. The Aedra in most faiths are described as protectors and guides, whereas Vile's investment is more so because mortals are his ants to toy with and a source of unlimited entertainment. However, in this respect, I find him to be one of the most unique among the Daedric princes. Consider also that Barbas was not the only known example of himself splitting power. Let us look to Umbra. The Umbra Sword, more commonly referred to as simply Umbra, is a Daedric artifact designed to entrap souls. Black as pitch and as sharp as the edge between life and death, this sword has been in the hands of many throughout Tamriel's history, but first we must look to the hands that made it. A long time ago, there was a witch named Nainra. There are no specific dates and details given, but she was likely counted among the Reachmen and lived before the events of the Plane Meld in the Second Era. Reachman stories say that Nainra wore the witchwise headdress during her creation of the Umbra Sword, and Reach witches today honour her for once they pass the final tests of wisdom set to them by the clan's elder, they gain the privilege to craft such an adornment and wear it with pride among their kin. What exactly Nainra's relationship with Vile was is not wholly known. However, given her Reachman background, de facto Daedra worshippers, we can assume that she was in service to Clavicus Vile, likely a worshipper of some kind. Perhaps, as I speculated before, Clavicus Vile had quite the importance among early Nedic tribes and their isolate derivatives such as the Reachmen. But by the Second Era at least, Clavicus Vile does not seem to be of great importance to them. Regardless of that tangential speculation, Nainra was requested by Clavicus Vile to make him a powerful sword, so that he would have a tool of mischief to send him souls from the mortal world. The powerful witch Nainra forged the sword with her black magics, but it was unstable, and so she asked Vile to give a piece of his power to be imbued within the sword so that it would stabilize. Vile did so, and the trickster god was tricked. The sword likely did not need his power, but for whatever reason, Nainra tricked Clavicus into parting with a portion of his being, and so Umbra became a sentience of its own within the sword. Again, this seems to be a rather unique phenomenon with Clavicus Vile. He seems far more willing to part with pieces of his power, a Daedra with Aedric tendencies perhaps. The sword was loose, and its wielders throughout history became consumed by the sentience of the sword. Their own personas slowly erased, and over time the wielders would simply name themselves Umbra and identify with the sword as well as its hunger for souls. In the Fourth Era, there is a whole series of events that leads to Umbra cutting away a slice of Clavicus's realm, creating the floating city Umbriel. And well, there's a whole story there that seemingly ended in the sword's destruction, but if certain content is to be taken with full seriousness, then in the year 179 of the Fourth Era, the Umbra sword appeared once more. If you would like to have a far deeper look into Umbra, we actually made a dedicated video and in-depth exploration of the artifact at the beginning of this year, so I'll link that beauty below. But while we're on the topic of powerful artifacts, let's not pass by his most iconic artifact, simply dubbed the Mask of Clavicus Vile. Throughout your adventures in Tamriel, you may have come across this mask once or twice, and have likely wondered why it is spelt M-A-S-Q-U-E, as opposed to M-A-S-K. This is an example of a homophone, words that contain different spellings and different meanings but are pronounced the same. Another example is horse, as in the four-legged creature you ride, and horse, H-O-A-R-S-E, as in the rough-sounding voice from shouting too much. Well, in this particular instance, the Mask of Clavicus Vile kinda takes on both meanings of the homophone. I mean, it is quite literally a mask, M-A-S-K, but M-A-S-Q-U-E mask is referencing a specific type of entertainment in the courts of old, an ordeal involving singing, dancing, and acting. The performers would also often wear masks. Mask with a Q is additionally related to the word masquerade, which has a few meanings, but its most contemporary one would be to act or live under false pretenses. Now, this Mask of Clavicus Vile maintains the spelling with a Q because to wear this personality-enhancing artifact is to masquerade as something you are not, hence the unique spelling. Wearing this Daedric artifact bestows the user with an otherworldly charisma and undeniable charm despite its strange physical appearance, and this is best expressed in one of the most well-known stories regarding the artifact. The best-known story of the mask tells the tale of Avela, a noblewoman of some renown. As a young girl, she was grossly disfigured by a spiteful servant. Avela made a dark deal with Clavicus Vile and received the mask in return. Though the mask did not change her looks, suddenly she had the respect and admiration of everyone. A year and a day after her marriage to a well-connected baron, Clavicus Vile reclaimed the mask. Although pregnant with his child, Avela was banished from the baron's household. 21 years and 1 day later, Avela's daughter claimed her vengeance by slaying the Baron. A truly tragic story, a tale that encapsulates both the whimsical cruelty of Clavicus Vile and the allure of his powerful mask. Once again, like was said earlier in this video, Clavicus Vile seems to thrive off sociability, conversation, wit, trade, trickery, wishes and deals, all of which require mortal societies, and his signature Daedric artifact is a potent example of just that. A mask that grants you the adoration of others and the charm of a silver tongue is useless to an all-powerful wizard who does not care for the opinion of others, nor for a warrior who will just strong-arm his way in every situation. It is a Daedric artifact made for people who care, who want others to like them, whether it was a Nedic chief of ancient history, a Breton king, a disfigured noblewoman, or even a merchant who wants to master the art of the deal. This artifact is only valuable to mortals who care about their place in relation to others. It is funny to me to imagine Clavicus Vile just sitting back and watching the events of Mundus like each new episode of a soap opera. And beyond the mask, Clavicus grants similar effects of charm and likability, such as the case with the vampires of Cyrodiil. The vampires of Cyrodiil uniquely recognize Clavicus Vile as their patron. In the book Manifesto Cyrodiil Vampirum, it says, "On our order, know first that we are no simple tribe of savages, tearing throats with the orgiastic abandon of our scattered tribal brethren. Ours is a civil fraternity to which we are bound, every one, by our dual hunger for flesh and influence. By the virtue of imperial structure and bureaucracy, Cyrodiil has become our stronghold in the Third Era, and we suffer no savage rivals within our boundaries, reveal ourselves to none, and manipulate the hand of society to mete out our agendas. To Kinfather Molag Bal, who brought forth the blood matron LeMay to spite Arkay, we owe our existence, as do all vampires, though not all honor him. For him we revel in the feast and acknowledge the gift adrift in our veins. To patron Clavicus Vile, beacon over our affairs, we owe our successes and social stature. Our bond with Vile makes us unique among our kind, for his guidance steals our savage craving with reason and savvy. For him we live amidst mankind, and twist them to our will from offices of power. It is Clavicus Vile's patronage that allows the Order of the Vampires in Cyrodiil to maintain their discretion, to avoid discovery, and to help them procure influence among society. They are the wolves in sheep's clothing, and this has been achieved through the blessings of Vile. It has long been the case in our real world that there are different rules for the elite and the riffraff, and the case is the same in Tamriel. There are powerful vampires amongst them in Cyrodiil performing profane sacraments in order to preserve their power, and quite literally leeching off the populace, draining them of their blood. But this kind of discreet privilege does not only apply to the vampiric populace, but the nobility too. In the Imperial Census of Daedra Lords, a piece written by Michael Kirkbride, the same piece where Clavicus is called Child God of the Morningstar, it says, "He bestows a strange tranquility to his lands that seem concordant to his spheres of mockery and oath-breaking, though what shape such concepts might take is admittedly unfathomable. Perhaps by rendering his domains as idyllic countryside, the prince exemplifies his greatest aspect, and that which ingratiates him to his many followers, the power of serenity through wish fulfillment. Only the strongest of the Emperor's servants are advised to make covenant with Prince Clavicus, and even then are warned against sipping from the bitter cup." This writing makes the implication that high-ranking nobles of the Emperor's court have made a habit of conducting business with Clavicus Vile, despite, of course, owing their worship to the divines of the imperial cult. And there is specific mention here of the Bitter Cup, another of Vile's Daedric artifacts. Those who dare to drink its nectar are bestowed with great power at great cost. In game terms, in Morrowind, drinking from the Bitter Cup increases your highest attribute by 20 points and decreases your lowest attribute by 20 points. A min-max kind of deal. If you're a character that has no use for magic, say an orc warrior, well then drinking its nectar may be entirely beneficial, increasing your strength or willpower by 20 and decreasing your intelligence by 20, which doesn't really matter if you seek to never use magic. In lore terms, you can imagine drinking from the Bitter Cup would simply increase your greatest strength, taking an elite sprinter to Usain Bolt level, but at the same time perhaps you're socially awkward, and it takes your social skills to Molag Bal incel tier levels. Beware when sipping from the Bitter Cup. In all honesty, beware of anything to do with Clavicus Vile. It is no wonder that his Daedric realm of Oblivion is titled The Fields of Regret, considering that is the feeling most would have after entering a deal with him. The Fields are a tranquil, idyllic countryside dotted with majestic cities of glass and ornate buildings filled with Scarfen, which are a race of Daedra similar to Dremora, but with yellow or orange-hued skin, red eyes, and long black horns, varying in size from impish to imposing. They seem to be Vile's favoured Daedra, and Vile himself appears with attributes and motifs similar to them, most notably the horns. They inhabit the Fields of Regret and roam its dense forests, lakes, and mountains, a geography marked as otherworldly by floating golden metals and stone spirals. I suppose the Fields of Regret may not be the worst kind of Daedric realm to live in, but I suppose on the other hand, the reasons you may find yourself there are less than ideal, and likely involved some poorly thought out wager of your soul in a game Clavicus Vile rigged to win. While the particularly savvy may be able to win out and benefit from interactions with Clavicus, simply consider that on average, far more lose, and so your chances are not that high. There is one more artifact to discuss, one that's only presence is within a historical fiction of the same name. Fay Falcon is simply an enchanted quill that came into the hands of Thaobad, a sage of the Temple of Auriel. This quill took what would be considered base or even unappealing writing and transforms it into a scripture of unparalleled quality. However, there is a trade-off. Use of the quill manipulates the thoughts of those who use it, and so while you may be writing the novel of your dreams, Fay Falcon may be nudging your psyche in certain directions, tainting your thoughts and perhaps even pushing you in directions that you would not, if free of it, desire. The story of Fay Falcon ends tragically with Thaobad the Sage being driven to his own suicide. If there is any insight to be gained from the study of Clavicus Vile, then it is quite simply this. He is the child with a magnifying glass, and you are the ants. While he lacks the eldritch horror of Hermaeus Mora, or the straightforward apocalyptic destruction of Mehrunes Dagon, the scariest thing about Vile is that he does take such an invested interest in mortals. He needs mortals to stave off the boredom of eternity. Whereas Daedra like Nocturnal may be happy slinking in the shadows and bestowing luck to thieves, Clavicus will not be content until he is causing mischief, playing little pranks in the fine print, manipulating the wordings of deals and wishes that mean so much to a mortal life, only for a laugh, a quick jolt of joy before Vile is bored and seeks out some new form of entertainment. Perhaps that is the solution when dealing with Vile. Make helping you far more entertaining than it would be to undermine you. Make him invest in your success as it would provide the most entertainment. Easier said than done, of course, but if you can't manage that, then perhaps keep your ear to Barbas, the more reasonable of the duo. Many a time he has convinced Clavicus to keep true to his end of the bargain, but again, do not forget that they are cut of the same cloth, and Barbas at the end of the day is most loyal to Clavicus Vile. Clavicus is one of the most unique princes in that he is two within one, a Daedra of rather Adric tendencies, his splitting of power to create, his investiture in mortals. Child God is a rather fitting description in my opinion. His love of social interaction and games, his need to stave off an eternity of boredom, a boy and his dog, but with godly powers and a lack of moral guidance in a parent. Don't enter into a deal with this devil without thought. Thank you so much for watching. The Daedric Princes are the best part of the Elder Scrolls lore, and I'm excited to be delving into more of them like I did today, and I would ask of you to like the video in support of this content if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more of these Daedric Prince explorations, and please do comment below and contribute to the theory crafting and conversation. It's one of the greatest parts of the Elder Scrolls. There is so much room for interpretation and theory crafting and discussion, so let's get to it. Thank you all again so much for watching. My name is Scott from Fudge Muppet, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.